Here's a personal observation. Some of the most interesting and accomplished people I know have radio call letters somewhere on their resume. Back when stations were full of people, they were like salons with great exchanges of political, cultural, and musical ideas. It's no surprise that author, publicist, and Grammy-winning producer Tamara Saviano did some time in radio. What you might find surprising, though, is how a girl from Wisconsin ended up in the South and in the trusted inner circle of legends like Guy Clark and Kris Kristofferson. Tamara writes about it in her new book, Poets and Dreamers, My Life in Americana Music. And with the annual Americana Summit happening in town, our timing is good.
If you think about the Byrds and, Graham Parsons and the Flying Burrito Brothers and what the Nitty Gritty Dirt Band was doing with the Circle, and, there was all kinds of sort of left of center music that was happening, and it just didn't have a place. There were some people that were happy to have a place, and there were some people that were like, no way, you're not labeling me. A lot of them came around, though, because they realized how powerful it was to have a place that started with radio, but then when the trade organization happened, now you had record stores that would have bins saying Americana, and a Grammy category, and festivals, and clubs that specialize in it, and, a business was built around it, which, is still a niche, but it's a pretty powerful niche right now.
I'm Demetria Kalodimos. It's Banner and Company. Well, Tamara, my friend, I'm so glad you accepted our invitation.
I'm so happy to be here, Demetria. Thank you for having me.
Certainly. Busy people sometimes get a little nudge to slow down, but you got quite a bit more. Tell me that story.
I broke both my ankles. I was not doing anything exciting. I stepped off a step in my yard to go for a walk that I stepped down every single day. And
right.
Turned to close the gate, fell weird, broke both ankles, and ended up having 2 surgeries on my left ankle. And I was in a wheelchair for 4.5 months. Got a lot of writing done.
Because what else could you do? What couldn't you do? That's a better question.
Well, I couldn't drive. I couldn't walk. The only way I could go out of the house is if my husband loaded me in the wheelchair in the car and then took me somewhere that a wheelchair could get around, which I learned very quickly that it's certainly not easy for anybody that has to live in a wheelchair. So we'd go to Whole Foods because they had wide aisles. That would be my field trip. That was it, pretty much. Yeah, it was weird. I mean, I knew I was going to recover, so I had that to look forward to, but what a interesting way to slow down.
And you knew both of them were broken immediately?
Immediately. Immediately. There was just no doubt. And my husband said I yelled out, I broke my leg. And he said, you fell 3 inches. How could you have broken your leg? But yeah.
Well, I hope I didn't take you into PTSD territory.
No, not at all. Not at all. No, yeah.
You write about what interests you.
Yes.
A business manager would probably slap your hand over that, but you've had great luck doing that.
Yeah, I mean, money has never been a big motivator for me. I mean, as long as I have, enough to pay my bills and feed me, I really don't care about anything else. So it's easy for me to just say, okay, I'm going to do a little work over here to make money, and then I'm going to go do this project that I really want to do. And I don't regret it at all. I mean, some of them I spent a little more time on than I wish I had, but yeah, it's been great. I feel very fortunate that I've been able to do that.
But you've been writing your entire adult or even teenage life, right?
I started keeping a journal when I was 13. My grandpa gave me one of those little orange diaries with the lock on it. Yeah, and the key for my 13th birthday. And I started writing that day, and I haven't stopped. And I, as a diarist, as a journalist in that regard, I really love keeping track of my life and the people in my life by doing that. And it sure came in handy for my latest book because a lot of the stories from my point of view came directly out of those diaries. And when I went back to read them, it was like, oh, I forgot about that. Oh, wow, remember that? I never would have come up with some of that stuff on my own. So it was great to have those as as my main sources.
How often do you pull out the earliest ones from Nashville that tell the story of how you got here?
I really have never pulled them out until I worked on this book. Usually, I write them and I have these big Rubbermaid tubs and I just throw them in there and then they stay there. Now, when I was writing the Guy Clark book, I went back and looked at some of the stuff from my time with Guy. And when I was writing that book is actually when I got the idea for this book, because there's 2 chapters in the Guy Clark biography where I'm putting Guy in the context of Americana music. And over those 2 chapters, it was the most fun I had writing. And I'm like, oh, well, this is next. So I knew that I would want to do something bigger with that.
Let's talk about Americana.
Okay.
Was it a reaction or a realization or both?
I think it was both. John Grimson, Rob Bleetstein, and Brad Paul all worked in radio or radio promotion, and they saw what was happening in mainstream country radio. They quit playing Johnny Cash, they quit playing Willie Nelson, they quit playing Roseanne Cash. And they wouldn't play people like Kevin Welch and Rosie Flores, and so they decided. These 3 guys are just like, we need to talk the Gavin Report, which was an industry trade magazine, into starting an Americana radio chart, and then we'll find the stations to play Americana. So they built this from the ground up, these 3 guys. And the first chart landed in January of '95. So, there was Americana music before that, of course.
Just not a radio home.
Right, and it didn't have the label Americana. But, if you think about the Byrds and, Graham Parsons and the Flying Burrito Brothers and what the Nitty Gritty Dirt Band was doing with the Circle, and, there was all kinds of sort of left of center music that was happening, and it just didn't have a place. They were trying to fit it into country radio or AAA radio or whatever format, and that it just didn't work.
Classically, though, an Americana song, without painting it with too broad a brush, doesn't fit into a neat little radio package.
It doesn't. They tend to be longer, and Americana artists tend to be singers, songwriters, and musicians. So they're writing their own songs, or singing their own songs, or playing their own songs. So it doesn't. Yeah, it just doesn't fit into a normal radio thing.
What did the artists, how did they react to all of a sudden having a place to fit in when famously many of them wore as a badge, I don't fit in?
Yeah, I think there was a lot of both. There were some people that were happy to have a place, and there were some people that were like, no way, you're not labeling me. A lot of them came around, though, because they realized how powerful it was to have a place that started with radio, but then when the trade organization happened, now you had record stores that would have bins saying Americana, and a Grammy category, and festivals, and clubs that specialize in it, and, a business was built around it. The radio chart started it, but then there was this business built around it, which, is still a niche, but it's a pretty powerful niche right now.
Yeah. Poets and Dreamers is the name of your book. My Life in Americana, is that the second line?
Yeah, My Life in Americana Music, yeah. 35 years for me.
Did you know it was going to be a thing until those guys gave it a name, as you said?
No, and I was working in country radio in my hometown of Milwaukee. In the 90s, I started in 90, so in the early 90s when they were playing like the Mavericks on country radio and Dwight Yoakam and every once in a while there would be somebody we now call Americana breaking through. But like the class of '89 happened, which was Alan Jackson, Clint Black, Garth Brooks, Vince Gill, I can't remember, Mary Chapin Carpenter's in that class, but and that just pushed everything in one direction. And I love all of those artists, and I'm fans of all of those artists, but there just wasn't room anymore when that class of '89 just blew up. And so that was around the time that, not in Milwaukee where I was, but around the country, there were people starting to, come up with a place for this other music that didn't yet have a label.
It's Banner and Company. I'm Demetria Kalodimos. We'll be right back.
Mint is still $15 a month for premium wireless. And if you haven't made the switch yet, here are 15 reasons why you should. 1, it's $15 a month. 2, seriously, it's $15 a month. 3, no big contracts. 4, I use it. 5, my mom uses it. Are you playing me off? That's what's happening, right? Okay, give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
Upfront payment of $45 for 3-month plan, $15 per month equivalent required. New customer offer first 3 months only. Then full price plan options available. Taxes and fees extra. See mintmobile.com.
Now, you can take the Wisconsin out of the girl or take the girl out of the Wisconsin, but how in the world did you decide to come south? Because that's a great part of the country.
Yeah, no, and I'm still homesick. I've been here 30 years. I'm still homesick. Raul Malo of the Mavericks talked me into moving here.
Was this like in an interview setting he was telling you?
Well, I had met Raul at, you probably know this place, Whiskey River in Chicago, which was playing a lot of the hipper country music in the late 80s and early 90s. And I would take the train from Milwaukee to go to Whiskey River. And a friend of mine was running the Rose Record stores out in the suburbs in Chicago, and he introduced me to the Mavericks, and then I went to see them play, at Whiskey River. And Raul and I just hit it off immediately. So the Mavericks were playing in Chicago and Milwaukee a lot, and this is right when they got their MCA deal. I don't know why, but they were very popular in those markets. So one night after a show and after bar time, because we were young, Raul and I were at this little diner called Ma Fisher's on the east side of Milwaukee at like 3 a.m, eating pancakes and eggs. And he just said, I think you should move to Nashville, move from Milwaukee to Nashville. I was like, why would I do that? I have this great radio gig. And he said something like, you're too creative to work in radio, and I think you would really, fit in Nashville. And I really didn't give it much thought that night, but then it was kind of in the back of my mind. And I thought, maybe I should, get away from home, because that was where I was born and raised. And I didn't get out much before that.
When you got here, were you able to apply that creativity immediately into actual work?
Yeah, pretty fast. I started working in artist management. Terry Clark was a country singer, and I worked for her management company briefly, and then I went to Capitol Records. That really wasn't for me, so then I went back into the media side, and I was a writer at Country Weekly and then an editor at Country Music Magazine, and then I opened the office here for Great American Country Cable Network, and I was the operations manager. And then started my own company in 2002 with Kris Kristofferson as my first client, my own PR management company.
Hold the phone.
Yeah.
If Kris Kristofferson is your first client, how in the world did that invite happen?
Well, it's even better to say this line. John Prine and Al Bonetta introduced me to Kris Kristofferson. So
the names have dropped so heavy that the floor is breaking.
I know.
No, that's terrific.
Yeah, GAC, when I worked there, we rented an office from Oh Boy Records.
John's label.
Yeah, on John Prine's label. And Al Bonetta, who was John's partner and ran the label, their office was upstairs from us. So we hit it off. His name was Bonetta, mine Saviano. So every night after work, I'd go up to visit Al, and we'd have a glass of wine together, and John would be there sometimes, and they'd play me music, and
wow.
we just, it was great. And when you're doing this stuff in the moment, you really don't think about how consequential it might be in your life. But yeah, John John Prine and Albinetta.
I think you probably helped me get my one and only one-on-one with Kris Kristofferson when I was doing a documentary, also arranged through Albinetta.
Yes.
So
I remember that. That was
small,
out at
small
Al.
world.
That was out at Al's farm, wasn't it?
It was out at Al's.
Yeah.
Yeah. Kristofferson, the first time you met him, you must have been, of course, awestruck, but you guys developed a very, very close association.
We did. And
Was he skeptical of, a girl from Wisconsin, what do you know about me?
not at all. Al, we met on the phone first, Kris and I, and we had several phone conversations. And then the first time I met him was actually in Chicago at Soundstage. He was doing a PBS Soundstage taping with Russell Crowe was the other artist. And it was the first time I met Kris, and I remember Kris was, I don't know where he was, but he was away from where I was, and I was sitting at a table in the catering area, and Russell Crowe came and sat next to me, and he goes, "You work with Kris Kristofferson?" And I was like, "Yes." And he goes, "That's quite a gig. How'd you get that gig?" And I was like, this is actually like the first time I met him. I'm brand new at this. And it was funny to watch, Russell Crowe, who was such a famous actor at that time, just was so, into Kris and a little scared of him, But Kris was a lovely, lovely, warm, easy person to be around. It kind of spoiled me for anybody else, quite frankly.
Yeah, so much has been written about him being a janitor on Music Row and, getting discovered, etc. Is there a story that the normal folk don't know about Kris Kristofferson and his time in Nashville?
I think everybody knows the big stories, but what people don't know, I think, is just what a quiet leader he was without really trying. He wasn't trying to pull people along or push people. He was right there with them, but he was such a leader in many ways. Social justice activist, musically. He showed up in Nashville all the time for people, and when no one knew that he was here. And he was, he studied William Blake when he was a Rhodes Scholar in Oxford, and he really felt like being a creative person was an obligation and something that you should strive to do and not go to your deathbed having not created. And really, he helped me feel like I could go after my creative dreams because of that. So those are the kind of stories about Kris that people don't really know.
Did he love acting? Because he sure was good at it.
Yeah, he did. He loved music more, but the acting, he used to say that the acting paid for his music habit. So, he got paid well to act, and that helped him, be able to spend time on his music.
Towards the end of his life, I know he had a health concern that was misdiagnosed or at least misunderstood. How much can you share about that without being...
Yeah, no, he had Lyme disease, and that really affected him in, he had neuropathies, he had memory issues, he had all these strange symptoms that no one could figure out.
That people were saying, "Oh, you're getting old.
Yes.
This is dementia."
Yes. And he did end up, with dementia and, cognitive problems that could have been happened because of the Lyme, in addition to the Lyme. But once they cured the Lyme, once they put him on the right antibiotics, his neuropathies went away, and he started getting more bright-eyed again.
That was a nice reprieve for him towards the end of his life.
It was, yeah.
Yeah. We both, of course, share a friendship with the late Guy Clark.
Yes, we do.
We could go on for weeks. But how did your intro to Guy come about? Because I know you, like myself, two Midwestern girls, we were these unlikely fans of this Texas guy.
Yeah. Well, I discovered Guy when I was 14, and my dad and his friend had a record club on Saturdays, and my dad's friend brought over Old Number One. So that's how I discovered Guy, and I loved that record. But then, I was 14 and a fickle teenager, so I sort of put it aside. And then I met him in 1998. I was at the ASCAP Awards, and Guy was being honored that night, and I met him there. And it's funny. because Guy. I was like, oh, old number one, and I was 14, and I'm from Wisconsin, and, and he's just like, well, isn't that special, or something like that. But then Leroy Parnell took me over to Guy's house on April 1st, 2000, and I was there for 9 hours, and I would not smoke pot or drink with Guy. And I think that got his attention because most people just acquiesced and did it. And I was like, no, I'm not interested. Sorry, and I was interviewing him. And then he called me like a couple weeks later and said, hey, let's go to lunch. And then that sort of started it. And then I wrote the materials for his record, The Dark, which came out in 2002.
I remember exactly the time.
Yes, and of course Verlin. That's when I met Verlin too, around then, I think.
An aside here, Verlin at that point of time had fallen off of his roof and broken both of his wrists at the same time. So that must be something that you guys do in association with Guy Clark.
And Verlin also told me about falling and breaking his hip and dragging himself from the garage. I'm like, yeah, broken bones, no fun.
But Guy Clark was, you talk about Kristofferson saying the acting paid for his music habit. Think of all the multi-talents of Guy Clark. I mean, a master painter. You know better than I do some of the things that he does or did that were just always at the highest level. How can someone get that much talent?
I don't know. It's not fair. But yeah, he was. And Guy, as you know, like I asked him once if he was ever interested in writing his own book or writing, he and Sean did the whole Sis Draper thing. And I said, what about a musical? And he was like, I'm not interested in that. I just want to write songs, paint, So he knew his own mind and did whatever he wanted to do, which I always admired in his curmudgeonly way. He just did whatever he wanted to do.
Yes, but he placed his trust and his finger on your shoulder and said, write my story.
Well, he did. And it really surprised me because a friend of mine who works in Texas asked me if I would write a biography about Guy Clark. And I said, I'd love to do that, but Guy would never participate, so I would never do it because I really didn't believe he would truly participate. And so I just forgot all about it, and my friend kept nudging me. So finally I called Keith Case, who was managing Guy, and I said, hey, can you just ask Guy this so I can get the no and get this guy off my back and move on? And Keith called me like an hour later and said, Guy's in.
Shock City. Yeah.
Yeah. And I was like, I don't believe it. So I went over to his house and I said, look, Guy, this is how this is going to go. I'm going to ask you all these personal questions, and I want you to introduce me to all your family and friends and colleagues, and I'm going to ask them personal questions. And I'm going to dig through every single paper in your life, go through all your stuff, and then I'm going to go away and write this book, and you can't read it until it's published. And I thought he'd, tell me to get out of his house then. And he just kind of leaned back and, sounds fair to me, Tamara, and that was it. And I still didn't believe it, though. I thought, oh, he's not going to give me anything. But the first story he told me was about Susanna's sister, who Guy was in a relationship with before Susanna. Her name is Bunny. And he told me about Bunny killing herself. And that's how he and Susanna got together. And I thought, well, this is how we're starting. Okay, he really is in. Mm-hmm. And then, there we went.
He never pulled back. No regrets on that.
No. And I called Rodney, after that first day I left, and I called Rodney from the car and I said, guess what Guy just told me? And Rodney was like, he told you that? Wow, he is in,
For those listening, we're talking about Rodney Crowell.
Rodney Crowell, I'm sorry. Yeah.
I mean, there are several Rodneys in
there
music,
are, yes.
So,
yeah.
I didn't want to not talk about the tribute albums that you have produced, won a Grammy, been nominated for other Grammys with. Why do we love tribute albums, first of all?
Well, I love them because as a journalist, I just think it's another way to tell somebody's story. So, because I'm not a musician and I'm not a songwriter, but I love songwriters. And I think that if you bring in other people to sing their songs and put it together as a complete work, you can tell this story in that medium. So that's the way I look at it. And I love tribute albums, probably that's why I did so many, but and they're fun. It's fun to go in a studio and work when you're not a musician.
Which one has been your favorite? And remind the people of the ones you've done.
Well, the first one I did was Beautiful Dreamer, the songs of Stephen Foster, and that's the one that won the Grammy. And that was my learning curve one. We did take people into the studio with different configurations of a band, but then some people just sent in their tracks, and I kind of learned from that yeah, I love the album, but I learned from that I really wanted to have a house band. Then we did The Pilgrim, a tribute to Kristofferson for his 70th birthday, and I had co-producers on that, and it was great, but we did some things that I would have done differently. So then when we did
It's a learning curve.
It's a learning curve. So when we did the Guy Clark record, Shauna and Verlin, of course, helped a lot on that record, and they were the core band along with Jen Gunderman, but it really was my vision. And of course, Verlin, being the nicest man on the planet, is like, whatever you want, Tamara, and Sean fought me every step of the way. But it was great fun, and we worked on that record for 2 years.
And it's fantastic.
And I love it. I'm so proud of it. And then I did a Jackson Browne tribute kind of as a, work for hire, which was fun and got some great artists on it. But that was one of those pull in tracks from everybody and put it together. And then the last one I did, and I knew it was going to be my last one because I was ready to move on. I worked with Luther Dickinson on a tribute to Sun Records called Red Hot. And I really wanted it to be Memphis-centric, so I called Luther, and we went into Sun Studios and Sam Phillips Studios in Memphis, and we cut it with the same band that Luther put together, all Memphis people. And we recorded it in June of 2016, which was just a few weeks after Guy died, and it lifted me. Just being in the studio and being with these musicians and these creative people and mining the Sun catalog. And so that one is my favorite. I love that record. Every time I listen to it, it makes me happy.
Now, do you allow the person to sing the song they choose, or do you match them up? And how much arm wrestling is done over that?
I try to match them up because I get pretty strong ideas. But if somebody is truly resistant to it, we'll work something else out. But most of the time, they go along with it, and that's really fun.
Not everyone wants to sing the same thing?
No, I mean, sometimes, but what I usually do, I learned this from Beautiful Dreamer, is I go first to who I really want. If I could have whatever I want, who would that be and what song would I want them to do? And I go through that list first to see if I can match the person with the song. And then fill in around it.
What was the unlikeliest pairing that you thought really worked?
Well, on the Guy record, Ron Sexsmith, who is a Canadian singer-songwriter that Guy never met, and he never met Guy, and everybody else on that album had a relationship with Guy. But I'm such a Ron Sexsmith fan, and I heard he was going to be in town. And so I tracked down his manager, and I called her, and I said, her name is Kathy Hendricks. I'm like, Kathy, I hear Ron's in town. I'm in the last couple of days of recording this tribute album to Guy Clark. I would love to have him come in and do Broken Hearted People. What do you think? And she said, can you get me the song? And I said, yes. And so I ran, and that was back when, I couldn't just email her the song. I had to put it on a disc or something and drop it off. But Ron ended up coming in and doing that song the next day, and Verlin and Sean, played and then sang harmonies, and that was a really unlikely and last minute thing that came together, and it was fabulous.
It's Banner and Company, and my guest is Tamara Saviano, writer, producer, publicist, and what I call a master of the secret handshake. We'll be right back. Okay, so you are embarking on yet another book.
I am, and I decided with this Americana book that it was closing a pretty big chapter in my life and that I wanted to do something completely different and not write about musicians or songwriters. But I didn't know what I wanted to write about. And I was with Terry Allen, who's an artist, last fall, and I was saying that to Terry. I want to write something, but I don't know what, and I don't know who I want to write about. And I'd actually approached the director, Rick Linklater, about doing a biography, and that didn't work out. And Terry said, I think you should try writing fiction. And I'm like, fiction? No, I'm a journalist. No fiction. So I went and had tea with Jamie Harris, who's Mary Gaucher's partner, and I was telling her that Terry Allen challenged me to do fiction, but I didn't know, and I didn't. And she said, "Oh, you need to talk to Mary, because Mary just did this writing program that she loves that helped her write her book." So I texted Mary when I left, and Mary called me, and she goes, "Okay, Suzanne Kingsbury, she's like the book whisperer. She has this Gateless Academy, and it is like no other writing program you've ever done, and check it out." So I got in touch with Suzanne, said that Mary sent me, and told her that I was considering writing fiction, and she said, "Well, write 10 pages of fiction and send it to me."
Ooh, an audition.
That was like somebody telling me to go, build a tower downtown. Where do you even start? But I did it, and I just kind of pulled this story up and wrote it. Sent her the 10 pages and got into this academy that's kind of hard to get in. And it's a 10-month program. So I'm just graduating next week from that 10-month program. But it is intense. It has been an intense writing, intense in all the good ways. It has inspired me so much. So I'm writing historical fiction set in my home state of Wisconsin.
Yeah,
that was a long way to get to that answer. I'm sorry.
That's all right. It takes you back to Wisconsin, though.
Yes, it does. And I don't know about you, Demetria, but I miss Lake Michigan with every bit of my soul. So I love going home.
I do too. And this time of year, we're in the middle of hot summer. We used to always go to the North Woods of Wisconsin and take summer vacations where we had to take our ski jackets.
Yes, and I'll be doing that. I've already packed the ski jacket because I'm going to go up to northern Wisconsin.
Nothing like it.
I love it.
So please tell me you won't break any more bones this thing done?
I am not going to break any more bones. No, not happening.
What's left on your bucket list? Because it overflows.
Yeah, I think this, if I can write this book, if I can pull off writing a fiction book, that's it. I've done everything else I've ever wanted to do.
This has been great.
Oh, thank you so much. I always love seeing you.
Well, likewise. Banner and Company is a production of the New Nashville Banner. This episode was produced by Shauna Reynolds with assistance from Steve Haruch. It was edited by me. Original music is by Verlin Thompson. You can subscribe wherever you get your podcasts or go to NashvilleBanner.com. You're in good company. Our last question is in the fishbowl, and it's your choice.
From Kate Carrillo.
What is the first memory you remember that you can smell?
Pine trees and campfire. Growing up in the North Woods, yes.